jumping into the bottom 8 season review. I'm going to go from 16 to 9th. I've got to chat about my preseason prediction, and then I'm going to give out the awards. So starting with the Bulldogs, and I don't want to be too harsh here because obviously all these teams haven't had the greatest season. So I'm going to keep it try and keep it somewhat positive, but I've got to be real with you, and I probably sound like a sore loser as a Tigers fan from the weekend, but I did not realise how bad Canterbury's season was, to be honest. I thought they maybe won 5 or 6 games, but they won 3 games, which is pretty ridiculous. They were in quite a few games. They didn't sort of get blown out much at all in the second half, which is sort of what they've done the last 2 or 3 seasons, but still, they look a long way off being a good team. They've made a lot of good signings on paper, and I stress on paper because we said that last year and it had absolutely no impact. But there is a future for Canterbury and there's excitement with those new players coming in. So that's something they can have that the Tigers fans can't, including myself. But anyway, I'll try and not talk about the Tigers too much here until it is the Tigers section. MVP, not going to lie, it was tough to pick their most valuable player. I went with Adam Elliott. He played the third most games for them, I think. And he started pretty much every single one of them. And he's sort of just one of their only players who he'll give you a 7 or 8 out of 10 every week. Most of their players are either an 8 out of 10 or a 1 out of 10, or they're like consistently 5 out of 10. So he's probably the only one who's got an elevated consistency. And for me, he's their best player and was their best player this year. Someone who I think went pretty close to that, but maybe didn't have the consistency of Adam Elliott was Jake Avarillo. Playing in 5'8" at the start of the season, ended up being in the halfback. People think he's going to partner Burton in the halves next year. He won the most improved for me. In the games that they won, the very few, I don't even know if he played on against the Tigers. I was too busy focusing on us. But I remember the game against the Dragons that they won on. Could have been Good Friday. Could have been Easter Monday. No, it's not Easter Monday because they don't play then. Could have been... What day do they play? The Queen's birthday, maybe? They play on some sort of Monday, the Dragons, Bulldogs, and it's a public holiday. I've forgotten which day it is, but yeah, he steered the boys around there. I think he actually maybe scored 2 tries running himself. So, yeah, I think he's a really good player. Last year, he looked really good in the centres, but yeah, the levels he went out to be in a decent halfback in this competition I thought was really impressive. Best young player, I've gone with players who are sort of 1997 or younger, but it's sort of pretty loose. I went with Aaron Shoop, playing in the centres for the back half of the year. I actually think he's really exciting. He's had a really, really good junior career playing Australian schoolboys, I'm pretty sure. And from what I've seen of him, he looks like he could turn into a pretty good player. Nick Meaney, also someone who had a few pretty good games here or there and always gives his all. Rating out of 10, I actually predict the Bulldogs to jump up to 12, and my dad predicted them to jump up to 11. So if we keep that in mind, par being 5 out of 10, look, it can't be too good. It's maybe a 2. I know that's harsh because no one was ever really expecting much of them, but yeah, I thought they were going to be 12 for them to come 16th. It's not great, is it? So I've given them a 2 out of 10. Maybe off-field business could push it up a little bit, but yeah, unfortunately for the Doggies, I've got them as a 2 out of 10. Then I've got the Cowboys in at 15th, where I exactly predicted them right. Some of my predictions were pretty spot on, I must not lie. Interesting year for the Cowboys. They started really, really well. At one point, I believe they were in the top 8. After, I think, sort of round 5 to round 10, they had maybe a 4 out of 5 win stretch or something like that. And they were putting on a lot of points. Clifford left to Newcastle, Dearden came in, and I think that had a big shock throughout the team. I think they struggled for the next 6 weeks after that, and it sort of looked like a really bad move for them. But what we saw in the last month out of Tommy Dearden sort of changed my opinions on that. I still think Jake Clifford's a great player, and I think he'll do brilliant things at Newcastle, but I think Tom Dearden will also be a good player. They've got a lot of youth coming through, a lot of exciting youth. I think it's Jerome Nanai and Griffin Neem. They both look really exciting, the young forwards. Ben Condon and Halem Lukey also back rowers. So yeah, there's Hamaso as well. So there's some excitement at the Cowboys. which some of these teams outside the finals can't possess. They've got a lot of young players. They've just got to nurture the right ones, pick the right ones to keep, because as we talked about in the junior development, that they've actually had quite a few gun players come through their junior ranks in the last 8 years, and they have not necessarily chosen the right ones to keep. So, hopefully the Cowboys do well with this generation. Bet MVP, I've given it to Scott Drinkwater. I thought this one was pretty tough to pick, but for me, their success relies on Scott Drinkwater. I think when they play well, he plays well. And his defense improved a lot this year, which I think is something that needs to be noted. So well done to Scotty Drinkwater. Most improved, I've given it to Mitchell Dunn. Back rower, he might have been injured last year, or maybe that was 2019, but he was sort of just a bit part player, bit of like maybe a Michael Cheekham, sort of just filled a hole for you. And where this year, especially in the back half, he looked really, really exciting. And I think he's got skills. I think he can play in the half, centers, back row. So I think he's one who's going to be one to watch in the future. And best young player, I've given it to Murray Taulagi. I was actually close to giving this guy the MVP because I think he's one of the great best wingers in the competition personally. But I didn't really want to give a winger MVP. Rating out of 10, I predicted 15th, and they came 15th. My rating is against expectation, by the way. So for me, I'll probably give them a 4 out of 10. I would give them a 5 out of 10 if they were more consistent throughout the year. But the fact that they showed glimpses early and then sort of had a bad run down the back end of the season, I'll give them a 4 out of 10. And also they've got to sort out the Jason Taumalolo thing, because they've obviously got him for a long time left of that huge contract. And it's on a lot of money, so they've got to work out the best way to use Taumalolo, because he definitely did not have his best year this year. Then we got the Brisbane Broncos in at 14th. And interestingly, I think similar to the Cowboys, maybe a bit more for Brisbane, I think they're finishing with some ambition and some positive hope for next year. I think Kevin Walters said next year they want to win more than they lose, which I'm sure a lot of coaches would say, but I think he truly believes that they're a chance of making the 8 next year. MVP for me, it's got to be Payne Haas. He's just a level above everyone. Hopefully his knee injury from the weekend's not too... I think it was syndesmosis, actually. Hopefully that's not too nasty, and he can get into a full preseason and come back even better and bigger and stronger next year. Most improved, I've got Herbie Farnworth. I think this guy's a really underrated player, to be honest. I think he's one of the best centers in the competition. I'll definitely have him in my top 5 centers. He runs for like 130, 140 meters a game. Line break, try, assist machine. I love Herbie Farnworth. I think he's got a lot to offer, and we saw that on the weekend. He played pretty well against Newcastle. Special mention to Tyson Gamble, sort of came out of the woodwork. Filled a role for the Broncos for a solid 2-3 months there, and I think he's a big reason why they became competitive in the second half of the season. So shout out to Tyson Gamble. And then best young player, I've got Tessie New. First half of the season, forgettable for Tessie New. I think he got dropped in about round 3 or 4, but he came back in the second half, earned himself a contract extension, and he looks like he's going to be a gun in the future. A really, really good player. So Tessie New, best young player for me. Rating out of 10, I predicted them to win the wooden spoon. And I know this is rogue. Brisbane coming 14th, and I'm not critiquing them harshly, but I don't know, the way they finished the season and some of the wins they produced over top 8 teams, I'm actually going to give them a 6 out of 10. We did this at the halfway point. I would have probably given them like a 4, but I think the second half, they really changed the narrative surrounding Brisbane. Ben Eichen came in at a director of football role, and a lot of the talk about Brisbane is sort of hushed, really, and I think there's excitement for next year. They've made some big signings, so they're going to be one to watch over the preseason to see if they could be a surprise bolter next year. Then West Tigers next in at 13th. I predict them to come 12th, so I was only one spot off. This is the opposite to Brisbane and Cowboys. I think the atmosphere surrounding the Tigers at the moment is a lot more negative than the latter maybe suggests, as it's a lot more positive for the Cowboys and Broncos than the latter suggests. But look, not the best season. I think people's expectations coming into this were too high. I look back at our preseason predictions. My brother Locke, and my dad both predicted Tigers to make the 8. And just looking at the 17, I don't think that was a fair expectation. Not to say I'm a know-it-all or whatever, but I think my prediction of 12th was pretty fair. They didn't really improve their side from last year, which came 9th, and there are a lot of sort of role players that were let go, and there was a lot more dependence on youth. So I think there was always going to be a backward step, and a lot of the teams below them took a step up, like the Titans. So I think there was always going to be that backward step this year. Personally, I know a lot of people didn't see it coming, but to me, it made sense, and I think that shouldn't be held against the Tigers. I think like coming 9th this year was a bit expected. And in the end, I was sort of surprised how close the Tigers came to finishing 9th. But all in all, not a good year though. More in the sense that there wasn't a direction set, and it's sort of not clear the path of success, which I thought was maybe going to be the result of this season. Into the awards, MVP, I've got Adam Dewey. I think he's a really unsung hero. I think just because he plays for a club that, doesn't play many primetime games, and people sort of just can the Tigers all the time. But I think Dewey's a really, really good player. Hopefully we can hang on to him. Unfortunately, he's got that serious knee injury and he's going to miss some of next season. But him at 5'8", him at centre, wherever he plays, he's one of our best players. Most improved, this is where you sort of see that maybe Michael Maguire's not the best player, not the best coach, because most improved was a really hard thing to predict. Thing to pick. I actually went to Alex Seyfarth, and I'm sure a lot of you at home don't really know who that is, but he went from playing a couple games on the bench in the last couple of seasons to he ended up being a starter before Josh Alawai ruined his season with a cannonball tackle and wasn't punished heavily enough for that. But anyways, and yeah, he gives it his all, really aggressive forward, and he's someone that hopefully is back to full fitness next year and can continue his improvement. Tommy Talau also, more not necessarily from last year to this year, more from the start of this year to the end. The start, he was one of our biggest liabilities. He got dropped. He had the worst hands in the rugby league, dropping 2 or 3 balls a game. But by the end, he was a very solid centre who would just give you a 6, 7 out of 10 every week. And as a Tigers fan, that's a nice change. I am happy to cop a player who will do that every week. So yeah, and unfortunately he did his ACL on the weekend, which is really, really shattering news. It's pretty daunting to think that 2 of our top, maybe 10 players in Talau and Dewey are going to be out for a lot of next year. But anyway, best young player, Dane Laurie and Stefano Utoikamanu. I couldn't split them, so I've given it to them both. Incredible signings, to be fair to Madge. Great pickups, and they're going to be ones for the future. It's just a matter of whether we can hold on to them. Stefano's the sort of player that the Tigers won't be able to hold on to in the past. He's going to be a jet. You just can't hold on to him. So hopefully we can, because that would be a huge thing for the Tigers moving forward. Rating out of 10, I'm doing it against my predictions. So I know a lot of you will say 1 out of 10, but I think that's a recency bias. I'm only going to give it a 4 out of 10. I think 3 could be debatable as well, but for me, they only finished 1 below where I predicted, and they were tied with 12th. So for me, it was a disappointing season, but I'm not overly shocked at the latter position. So for me, it's a 4 out of 10. Moving into the Warriors, and I actually think the Warriors haven't been thanked enough this year. Last year, they got all the plaudits, all the credit, and this year it seems to have died away, and I think it needs to be echoed. The rugby league world is indebted to the Warriors franchise. A lot of coaches, a lot of staff, a lot of trainers, a lot of players living away from home, not seeing their families for months on end, all for the competition to keep running as a 16-team competition. Huge shout out to the Warriors. They 100% sacrificed some on-field success for that to happen. That was a reason why I predicted them to come 13th. They came 12th, tied 13th, as I just mentioned, with the Tigers. I thought staying in Australia for a second year straight was going to be pretty taxing on them, and I think it ended up being pretty taxing on them. So Just a huge shout out to the Warriors. As I mentioned, I don't think it's been talked about enough. What they've done for the game has been pretty awesome. So well done to the Warriors. Now, look, I don't know. Warriors are a hard team to judge because they sort of always seem like they're in games. All their matches are close. And then you look at the ladder and you go, oh, shit, they've lost their last six, which I'm pretty sure happened in about July. But then they came home strong, won 4 of their last 5, I think. So, and looked like 1 point to be a dark horse for the top 8. So, all in all, I think it was a decent season for the Warriors. I'm going to give it a flat 5 out of 10. I think some of their signings were maybe a little bit underwhelming. I think the likes of Fanua Blake and maybe like a Bailey Sirinen or something did not... they didn't like change the team as I was expecting. I thought they were going to really elevate them, but overall, it's pretty much exactly where I expected them, so I'm giving them a flat 5 out of 10. For the awards, look, I don't know if everyone thinks this, but I think Rhys Walsh is a absolute freak. Like, I know everyone thinks he's a good player, but I honestly think this kid is next level. Like, I would borderline argue with you right now that he's better than Kalen Ponga right now, which is a interesting. I think it's a unique take. I don't think many would agree with me, but if you take his performances over the last week and compare it to Ponga, for me, it's hard to argue that that's not true. I think he single-handedly provides creativity to this team that really lacks it, and I think he adds a star quality to their team that they've lacked. I hope he doesn't go back to the Broncos. Not from a jealous point of view, but I think the Broncos should learn to live with this mistake. The Tigers often do, and they often get canned for it a lot. So I think the Broncos should have to. And I think a club like the Warriors, who took a punt on a young kid, I know he had a huge rap, so it wasn't necessarily a punt, but I think I would love to see Rhys Walsh reward them with a 4 or 5 year stint in New Zealand. I know it's a big thing for a young man to go live in New Zealand, and playing in Southeast Queensland for the Warriors, in quotation marks, is a bit different to actually living in Auckland and playing for them. But I really hope he stays. I think he's the kind of star they need to be a dominant force in the game. So I've given him most valuable and also best young player, and most improved I've given to Josh Curran. Saw him a couple times last year, didn't really know what he was. Thought he was just a decent player, but he showed himself to be an absolute freak of a back rower. When they went through their struggles, he was out for a lot of it, and that I don't think is a coincidence. Saw someone include him in a predicted Australian team bench this week, and that just says it all. He's arguably the MVP, but for me, he didn't play enough games, even though I think Rhys Walsh only played 1 more than him. But 5 out of 10 for me for the Warriors. Into the Dragons, 3 teams left. I predicted them to come 14th. They came 11th. So on that note, fair play to the Dragons, but ultimately, I don't. Similar to, they've given some young players some experience, which I think is important, but if I was a Dragons fan right now, I don't think I'd be filled with confidence, where I think Brisbane and maybe even the Cowboys could be a little bit more buoyed by their finishes to the season. I think the way the Dragons finished out the season was really disappointing. I know that whole barbecue incident had a huge bearing on their season. I don't think that can be ignored. The way they started, though, it's just it must be a cultural thing. I don't know how hectic their pre-seasons are or what they do during the season, but that's definitely, there's got to be a review into that. There's been about 3 or 4 seasons where they've been one of the best teams out of the gates like they were this year, and they just fall away. And this was probably one of their biggest fallbacks, I would have to say. I think the difference between their first half and second half of the season was incredible. Most valuable player, I'm giving it to Ben Hunt. I don't know. I feel like in the first half of the season, a lot of people were singing his praises, and I think everyone sort of jumped off that bandwagon. But I think this was genuinely one of his best seasons of all time. He averaged over 100 meters running as a halfback. That's awesome. Special mention to Matt Dufty. Didn't play. Sort of fell out of favour once they realised he was moving on and they started playing Sloan and stuff. But I still think when he played, there was a strong correlation to victory. Most improved, I've given it to Ben Hunt. I think he was a bit of a liability ever since he's been at the Dragons, but this year really stepped up. Best young player, hard to pick because Zach Lomax didn't play many games this year, so shout out to him. It would have been him if he played all games, but I'll give it to Blake Laurie, starting prop. Didn't really kill it, but a young starting prop with potential, and he's playing decently. Rating out of 10. Based on my prediction, I should give them above par score. But sort of just the way they went about their season, I think they ended up only being 2 points ahead of 13th. I could be wrong, ahead of the likes of the Tigers. I'm going to give them a 5 out of 10. As I mentioned, based purely on the stats that they came 11th, I predicted 14th. They probably should get a 6, but I'll give them a 5. I just don't think their fans would be buoyed with confidence. They've got some exciting talent coming through, but I think the next couple of years could be lean years for the Dragons. But we'll see. We'll see how good of a coach Anthony Griffin is in the next couple of years for sure. Then in 10th, we've got the Canberra Raiders. I actually predicted them to slide this year, which I'm sorry, but I'm pumped with that prediction, baby. I didn't go all the way of saying they would miss the 8, but I said they would come 8th. Obviously, they let set George Williams. Well, they didn't let, but George Williams left, which I don't think that can be ignored. That's obviously going to have a big impact on your season. Your halfback leaving middle of the year, but I don't think their whole season can be put down to that whatsoever. I think their forwards were really lacking. On paper, they've got the best forward pack in the competition period, and they were playing far from it. Josh Papali'i was nothing like his old self. Tarpany had a few good games here or there, but he wasn't like his normal self either. Hudson Young showed glimpses here or there. Harawira Naira showed sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right, but he showed glimpses here or there. But ultimately, it never really gelled together. I think Jack Whiten had a really underrated, like it's being under talked about how poor his season was. He was good last year. Obviously, I don't think he was the best player in the game, but he won the Dally M, and he just did not back it up at all. I looked to him a lot more this year after he won the Dally M because I was like, oh, maybe this guy's a freak and I'm just missing it. But yeah, I just don't really think he's that good. I think, like, this sounds outrageous. Luke Brooks is not a great player, but I honestly don't think Jack Whiten's that far off his level. Like, I honestly don't think Jack Whiten's very good. Sorry. Shan's injured as well. Another big factor for me. They look a lot better when Shan's plays. I think Ricky Stewart, I'm not saying he should be sacked or anything, but I think that spot should be talked about because I think what they got out of their team this year, it was really disappointing. It's going to be hard for them to replace George Williams. There's not many halfbacks on the market. You're looking at Luke Brooks. You're looking at Ash Taylor. And that's probably about it because the likes of Mitchell Pearce and Benji Marshall are not going to want to move to Canberra, that's for certain. So, it's going to be a big year. And I think if they don't make the top 8 again next year, I think we could see the end of the Ricky Stewart Canberra era. But most valuable player, I've gone with Jordan Rapiner. Top 5 most tackle breaks for the season, whether it was fullback or wing, he always gives 110% and always is a brilliant ball carrier out of the backfield, and he was a bit of a reason why they were as close to making the 8 as they were. Most improved, I've given it to Hudson Young. I think the way he came out of the blocks in this season, I thought he was going to be a breakout star, but he sort of was hit and miss. But I was looking at his stats and I was looking at the games he started versus the games he didn't, and they actually, when he starts in the back row, they actually won 8 games, lost 5. And that means when he doesn't start, they only won 1 game, I think. So obviously he's a pretty big player in that Canberra team. He always gives it his all. Sebastian Kris won my best young player. This was probably the most random breakout of the season. Didn't even think he would get a gig with Jared Croker and how am I drawing blanks on the other side? Well, I guess it was Curtis Scott, and then it ended up being Matt Tomoko. But yeah, Sebastian Kris was awesome. I remember round 1, he tore us up against the Tigers, and then he did it again round 2, did it again round 3, and then all of a sudden you're like, this guy's actually had a pretty good season. So he's one of my best young player. Rating out of 10. Look, it's got to probably be a 3 out of 10. I think it was a really poor season for them to think they were only in the grand final 2 years ago. they've only really lost 2 players, and they've actually replaced, not George Williams, but they've replaced Bateman with pretty good players as well, to fall to 10th and not look an inch of their old selves. I think it was really disappointing. So I'll give them a 3 out of 10. Finally, Cronulla. Bit of a weird season for Cronulla, as it has been the last couple. I actually predicted the John Morris sacking on the podcast, got that right. Predicted them to come 10th, was one off. And yeah, it was a weird season for them. They sort of made the finals the last couple years, but not been playing great footy. And I thought the same was going to happen this year. They just missed out though. I think they've got a direction now. Obviously, Nico Hines coming in, Dale Finucane coming in. But they're always a bit weird. Like, they never really commit to rebuilding. They sort of just keep rolling on. But Craig Fitzgibbon's coming in, so I guess you'll give them a crack. They've got a good enough team to make finals next year. It's just a matter of how Fitzgibbons can go with the side. MVP, I've given it to Will Kennedy. The Fox League commentators absolutely love Will Kennedy. I don't think he's as good as they say, but definitely provides a 7 or 8 out of 10 every week, which is, there's not many of them in the competition, but he's not like the best fullback going around or anything. But yeah, MVP for Will Kennedy. Most improved, I've given it to Connor Tracy. I think he had an underrated season this year, playing all sorts of positions, playing in the halves, playing wing, playing centre, playing fullback, and he always gave it his all and had a real red-hot crack for the Sharkies. Braden Trindle, also mentioned there, went from playing reserve grade to steering the ship at a near finals team in the second half of the season. Best young player, although he didn't play many games, I'll give it to Ronaldo Mortalo. When he plays, they won 50% of the games, meaning when they don't play, they have like a 30% win rate. So he's obviously a very influential player on the field. Rating out of 10, I'll give it a 5 out of 10. I was going to give it a 4, but it's pretty much exactly where I predicted them, and I don't think they improved or got worse. So probably a 5 out of 10 for me there. I'll address my top 8 season review once they all get knocked out, but I'll tell you what, my predictions were pretty decent. All right,
it's a miracle! Oh, yeah! What about that one? Unbelievable! Balotelli, Aguero! Crowd cheers. Here's Siddle.